Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 200 and something because I forgot to write it down of the Medieval Podcast. I'm Danièle Cebulski, also known as the 5-Minute Medievalist, and today is an extra special episode because we are recording live, which means I cannot go back and look at which episode we're talking about. We were recording it live in front of a legit studio audience at the International Medieval Congress at the University of Leeds. This is the largest medieval conference in Europe, and here we are headlining on a Monday night. Today is also an extra special episode because if you heard this, you already know that back again for a record-breaking third time, I think it's a record-breaking third time, is Dr. Eleanor Janega, everyone's favorite medieval podcast guest. So Eleanor is a doctor. Medieval studies, isn't it? Yeah, there we go. She's the author of The Middle Ages, A Graphic History, and The Once and Future Sex, Going Medieval on Women's Roles in Society. She's also the creator and host of some of History Hit's most popular video series, including Medieval Pleasures, one of your babies, as well as her own podcast, We're Not So Different, which is co-hosted by Luke Waters. So for anyone at home who's listening who has not yet had the pleasure of encountering Eleanor's work before, let me tell you that she is a sex historian among her many talents. So our conversation is going to get a little bit spicy. So if you have kids in the car right now and you're not ready to move forward in this part of their education, that is okay. You can pause the episode and you can come back to it later. But for everyone else, it is time to settle in and buckle up for the Medieval Podcast Live with Eleanor Janega, which is coming up right after this. All right. Welcome, Eleanor. We are here live. It's so good to see you. And this is our first time actually meeting in person. It's awesome. Welcome to the Medieval Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's quite funny because we've hung out online virtually so often that it seems odd that we've never met in person before. But there you have it. It's the wide and wonderful world of public medievalism, baby.
That's right. It's the future and the past at the same time. This is what we do. All right. So because we've talked about Eleanor's work in past episodes, especially the books, The Graphic History, and also Once and Future Sex, we're just going to talk to you today. Yeah. And by we, I mean me, it's the royal we, about your work, how you got here, and then we'll probably just go off on a tangent because that is what we do. So I got to ask you the question that everyone asks. How did you get into medieval studies in the first place?
By accident. Is the answer. So I knew I wanted to do history at undergrad, but I initially wanted to do Chinese history, more specifically. And I was quite interested in kind of like the Ming-Qing transition. But then in order to do this, I went to Loyola University Chicago. And instead, I met Barbara Rosenwein.
Oh my gosh.
and Teresa Gross Diaz. And it was over. It was just like done. It was done. So I came up in undergrad and, in high school, obviously, you can tell by the accent, through the American system. And so as a result of that, I took a bunch of AP classes, which meant that like I'd tested out of all of the like 101s and 200s and stuff. And, they kind of, back in those days, they gave you an actual like paper, like here's all the classes that you can take. It was way cooler than this whole online thing. And they were like, here's all the classes you can take. And Teresa Gross Diaz was teaching a course that was like called, I think, Medieval Society, 1200 to 1500. And I'd never had the opportunity before to really learn about medieval history in depth. So I was like, well, I believe I will, and it was over. It was just done. There's like, I think I took a couple of Chinese history classes, but like, God bless the Chinese history professors. They were really dull. And Teresa and Barbara are amazing. And it was just, there was no hope left for me. and I mean, the whole thing, I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer.
Yeah,
here you go. My parents are weeping, rending their garments right now as they hear this now. But basically, I just was so interested in it. And actually, that's why I'm quite passionate about my career now. Because I think that one of the things that is really true is that people are often not afforded the opportunity to ever learn about medieval history unless you get to university, right? That's like no one's taught it in high school. You're not taught, like maybe here in the UK, they'll be like, the Battle of Hastings, Magna Carta, Tudors, and like that's how it works, right? And people are really quite hungry for it, I think. So the thing that I really want to do with my life is let people know that they can know about this, right? Because it changed mine. So
It's so funny because my story is exactly the same one where I came across stuff, Robin Hood stories, King Arthur stories, but I didn't know it could be your profession until I got to university and I took a medieval literature course with Joanne Finnan, who mostly is a Celticist. She was just doing medieval romance and I was hooked. That was it.
Yeah. That's all it takes, right? That's all it takes is this is a kind of introduction and a way in. And, one of the things that I will say is I think that medievalists are really cool.
Really cool.
That's kind of like the thing. And so it's really easy to kind of fall in love with people and your instructors. And I mean, I think that's true of, every single person who's ever taught me medieval history is just an absolute legend and a wonderful person. And so I think that helps.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And we were just saying before we started recording that a lot of people in medieval studies are really nice and not just really nice, but really helpful and generous. So I think this field gives you a lot of mentors that you can learn from, and they really just help you coming from the ground up. At least that was my experience, and it sounds like it was yours as well.
Yeah. And so, I mean, absolutely, it's something that I'm quite effusive about, and I always say to people, when Americans ask me, how do I study, medieval history, I'm often like, have you heard of Loyola Chicago? Kind of thing. So, great department,
Yeah, that's right. I did my medieval studying. I began it at Trent University in Ontario, which is very small. So you get to really know everybody. And that makes such a difference when in this mentorship, as I was saying. So you started, Barbara Rosenwein, for example, is not a sex historian.
No.
So how did you get into this aspect of it? What drew you into it?
Well, so it's quite interesting because, even after deciding to be a medievalist, right? I didn't think that one could go around being a sex historian. I was like, that's not a thing. And I was kind of more interested, and in the thing that I still work on as well, which is kind of eschatology and apocalypticism. And I'm really interested in propaganda. And what I wrote my PhD on was apocalyptic preaching at the court of Charles IV in Prague.
As you do.
As one does.
Yes.
And that has rather a lot to do with sex work.
Yeah.
Is the answer. So particularly in the 14th century, oh my gosh, it's everywhere. Like you cannot find a popular preacher who isn't going on and on and on about sex workers, because they're very bad, underline, you understand, right? But this guy I wrote my PhD on, Jan Milch of Kromierzij, he, like one of his big things was, quote unquote, reforming sex workers. So, he thought Antichrist was coming. That was his whole deal, pointing at things and yelling Antichrist. Actually, that's doing him a disservice. He doesn't use Antichrist language. He's just always kind of like the sign of the times, etc. And so one of the big things that he wants to do is kind of like get out in front of sex work, reform sex workers. He like changes a brothel into a religious institution, and that's his whole deal, right? Wow. So in order to write about that, I had to learn more and more and more about sex work, and then that got me interested in reading more and more about sexuality. And then once I was done with my PhD and no one could tell me what to do, baby, like I just kind of started doing more of that. But also more particularly as well, along with that, when I started doing more public history. I don't know if you've heard this, but sex sells.
No.
Yeah. So if I was like, hey, does everyone want to hear about a Czech apocalyptic preacher? Who wants to hear about? There are fewer takers on that, even within academia. Shocking. Well, I've got a lot to say about you people and your disrespect for the grand kingdom of Bohemia, but it's one of these things where that's something that interests people. And again, much in the way that medieval history really interests people are quite interested in sex history because that's also not something that you get taught.
Yes.
Literally, it kind of like took me being like, well, I'm just going to do this, and that's what's going to happen now. And of course, there are a million amazing sex historians like Ruth Mazokaris, who I'll praise. I can't even talk about her because I'm not worthy to. But the list goes on, right? Like there are so many amazing people who've done the work, but it often doesn't get translated to a public audience. And so I was like, well, I believe I'm going to do that. And
well, I think it's important work, and I think that it's an aspect because people are kind of like shy to talk about it, especially in professional spaces. It's something that really gets missed when it comes to talking about human dynamics. And we know that the history that we write is caused by humans, right?
Yeah.
And so like the desire to be with other humans is actually so significant. So when we talk about dates and kings and wars and stuff, that is very important. But like, how important do you think it is, this biological function that we have? Like, how much do you think it's changed history? I think about Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, for example.
Okay.
Like that dynamic, I don't think works unless you have a little bit of some spice going on in there. What do you think about this in broad strokes of history?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that it's one of the driving forces of humanity, right? Like whether or not one likes to admit it. And indeed, most people don't, right? Is the answer. But I think that it's one of the things that I find quite interesting in terms of difference between medieval people and modern sensibilities, right? Is medieval people were a lot more ready to talk about sex.
Oh, for sure.
You know, and like even within a religious context, you know, like you can't stop them. I mean, it's just like Thomas Aquinas is like, and here's another thing, you know, about nocturnal emissions. Like, you know, he's not going to stop. And it kind of shows, I think, the difference in terms of our sensibilities and how important it is, right? Because if theologians who are not supposed to be having sex anyway, but you know, they spend a large amount of time kind of thinking about this as one of the animating forces of humanity, and one of the things about being alive, right, is making choices around one's sexuality. Is one going to be the ideal human, right, and be a member of the clergy and you know, forego sex altogether, or are you going to kind of like, are you going to get married and be, you know, fecund and procreate and do all the right things, right? Or, you know, are you going to be one of those very naughty people who actually enjoys it? Ooh, you know, imagine. But medieval people are really ready to say that this is an organizing principle of society. And I think it's actually a modern thing. And I mean, I would blame the Victorians because there's no Victorianists here who can tell me not to. But, you know, I would blame the Victorians for this whole kind of like, no, push it under, like don't talk about it at all. And this is an unimportant thing that is kind of sometimes a byproduct of having children, right? You know, so I think that one of the really wonderful things about doing sex history specifically in the medieval context is how much we have to work with. Like, oh my God, the sources, like there's fantastic sources if this is what you want to work on. And it really kind of shows up how the way that we talk about sex and think about sex is so completely different, and how important it is, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's one of these things where it feels like there used to be this tendency to not talk about feelings and emotions and stuff, because that means as a historian, you're not objective. But if we forget about the fact that people are making decisions because they're angry or they want something or they're hungry.
Yeah, absolutely.
These are the things that actually make a difference in history, broadly speaking. Like I was at the Chalk Valley History Festival this week, and people were talking about Richard III, as you do, and him like perhaps like riding ahead of everyone else because he wants to take on Henry. Like, I don't remember that battle particularly well enough to argue whether that's the case or not, but maybe Richard is feeling something. He's feeling hungry. Maybe he wasn't fueled up that morning and like he wasn't making a good decision. Like, it's the smallest things that make a difference to history, broadly speaking, I think.
Well, yeah, because I mean, the hunger, like that's such a good point, where it's like, that's why you burned down London, right? Like, and I've been there, bro. Like, you know, it's sometimes I've just kind of felt like, yeah, I could do a revolt. I don't know, mild revolt, like when I'm hungry. Like that's real. You know, these are things. The material circumstances of someone's life are important, and I think that also, you know, I suppose that's you know, one of my hobby horses is regular old people. Like, you know, I like normal people, and like and what they're up to. You know, I just. I hate rich people. They're just, you know, they have everything and they're still mad, you know, and
maybe
like,
they're hungry.
Yeah, maybe they are hungry, but it's just like, you know, like I could never be Richard III. I'd be like, oh, I'm like the king's brother and I will live in unimaginable luxury for the rest of my life. Great.
Yeah.
Done. Like, I simply would not murder my nephews or whatever. So, you know, I fundamentally don't understand rich people. Now, I understand they're very important. for the purposes of history. I'm not saying that they aren't.
History.
But I like what normal people are doing because normal people are real and they are history too. And a thing that normal people do is have sex.
It's true. Now, so you have a career that is long enough now that I think you could see a shape of it. Have you found that there's been a difference from the beginning when you started talking about like sex as a historian and now? And I mean, I'm thinking mostly of the academy and the stuff that, you know, quote unquote counts, but also your work in the public. Have you seen a difference over the last little while? I can keep that quiet if you want.
All right, like the biggest difference I would say over time is it's the thing that I think most people who have you know, a career for a length of time will see is where I'm allowed to do it a lot more now. You know, kind of like when I started, everyone was like, well, what is all this? And it seems like rather unseemly. And, you know, now I think that, you know, I've kind of got to the point where people have realized that there is an audience for this and there's a taste for it in the public. Like that's become more acceptable. You know, not to say that, you know, I don't think anyone would, you know, ever say that they thought that it wasn't a topic for serious scholarly discussion, because it is. But I think that the kind of question was, is there a way of doing this with the public where it can be taken seriously?
Yeah.
Right. And it's not just kind of like tee hee hee.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things that I do face is like anytime if I ever write a piece that gets any traction at all, you know, like the evil people at the Daily Mail will like pick it up and then basically rewrite it. And like without credit, they'll like say my name and then like rewrite the thing and then like make money on it without paying me or whatever. And there's nothing I can do about that.
And no footnotes.
And no footnotes. And, you know, and it'll be like the most reductive way of talking about, you know, what I've tried to do, because I do try to make, you know, social points.
Yes.
You know, like I'm not just out here being like, haha, boobs or something, you know, but you kind of have to accept that, which is the downside. I think that when I sort of first started out, though, the other thing is as well, there wasn't such a kind of clear path in terms of what public history was going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, I think, you know, like not like people didn't know what a podcast was, right? Because people knew what a podcast was. But I think that it was certainly kind of seen as much more difficult to start one, or, you know, something that people didn't really participate in, or, you know, this sort of thing, right? And actually I got my start through blogging.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, blogs, baby. Remember blogs? And you know, and I still have my blog, right? And that was kind of like the first thing that I was doing. And actually, you know, when I first started my blog, I didn't have my name on it.
Me neither.
Yeah, because I was frightened because I wanted an academic job.
That's exactly it.
And I was like, oh, if people find out that I'm having fun,
that's
right. If people find out that I'm having fun writing about history, then I'm never going to get a job. And then I just kind of found out that like no one wanted to check historian. Anyway, and I wasn't going to get a job anyway, so I was like, oh, well, screw this, and like, you know, kind of put my name on it, and then that's how I ended up, you know, making a job.
Yeah.
And you know, it's kind of like it's one of these things in terms of kind of decision trees and the academy, and I think that that's probably changed. I think that's different. I think that plucky young grad students now could start a blog, and people would be like, oh, that's sweet.
Yeah.
You know, but I think that really at the time, it was certainly frowned upon.
Oh, for sure. I mean, people were saying like, we are about the same age. And when I started teaching in college, people were like, don't let them know about your kids. Never talk about your kids. Like, you don't want to look unprofessional in any regard. And so, the 5-minute medievalist thing was just to hide my name because I wanted to get an academic job. And I mean, it was also what I structured the actual blog post around. Like, this was the mission that I was on, was to create new medievalists in 5 minutes. But it was also to hide my name because, if you wanted to talk about anything that wasn't like Thomas Aquinas, you know, you were afraid that you weren't going to get a job after that. And then we found out there were no jobs anyways.
So it worked out. But no, like completely. And it's ridiculous now because it's like, you know, I was just like making a Pulp Fiction joke with the whole going medieval thing. And now I can't get away from it. I don't want it anymore. And everyone is like, no, you will take it. I'm like, I've branded myself, you know, branding. Yeah. I mean, like branding is of course useful.
Of course.
I think that is a good thing on the whole. But, you know, it's also like one of these things where like I did it because I had to have a pseudonym.
Yeah.
And I don't think you do now. I don't think you do.
No, I think that for the people who are listening and starting out, I think you should put your name on it to begin with and start to build that portfolio, because that is how people found me, which is a good segue into my asking you. So you're still working in academia, you're still teaching and all that stuff. At what point did you decide you're going to also expand into the public as well?
So I was kind of making the decision about what it was I was going to do, I suppose. This must have been around in the year of our Lord 2017, I think. And I was sort of like, you know, like I'd applied for a job in the Czech Republic, and they wrote me this very sweet email back, like personal email, where they're like, "Oh, honey, like why is like someone living in the UK trying to get a job here?" And I was like, "There's no jobs, please help." And they were like, "No, this is a job for, you know, people who've grown up here." And I was like, "I'm Czech too," and they're like, "No, you're not." I'm like, "Okay, fine." Anyway, so and I was like, "Well, I guess that's it, right? Like there's just not going to be, you know, a job for me." So I was kind of like, well, but I enjoy this. And if this is like what I do on a Sunday, right? If the thing that I do for my hobby is I have my blog and I read books, then at least kind of like that's something, you know, and I won't be like completely bereft and on the streets. And so I just kind of like kept on with the blog. And then I then also entered the charred and hated landscape that is Twitter. Which you know, well, now it's dying. So like no one has to do it. It's dying. It's not beautiful and it's dying. And, but that was kind of like then one of the things that sort of kicked it off, because this is like one of the things that I'm always kind of saying to people if they're interested in public history is it's all well and good to have a blog and it's all well and good to have a podcast. You have to have ways of disseminating it.
That's it.
Because you like no one's gonna find you if you're just like, you're writing something like where they're gonna like Google. No, they're not. Like that's not. And of course you can do SEO. You can do all these kind of like ways of like optimizing things so that if there are Google searches, people will find your blog, right, or they'll find your podcast. But fundamentally, if you don't have a way of putting it in front of people, and I happen to be good at Twitter. It's such I hate it.
You are really good at Twitter.
Oh God. It's the most embarrassing thing that you could ever say in the world. But and like more particularly, the thing I'm really good at is finding some Nazi who's saying something ridiculous about the medieval period and then making fun of them.
That is your special
talent. Because Twitter is terrible and an evil place, it's an evil, bad place where you must never go. It rewards bad behavior. I would say, you know, like it rewards kind of snarkiness, right?
It's true. Because I think we arrived at Twitter at relatively the same time, probably. But because she is so much better at zingers than me,
you gotta have the zinger.
She just rocketed up the charts.
Yeah, and then I made a pair of booty shorts, and like that was literally the icing on the cake because I was so tired of people saying things about the Dark Ages. And so I made a pair of hot pants that say the term Dark Ages refers to a lack of sources, not intellectual decline. And I took a picture of myself wearing the hot pants. And then now it lives without me. Yeah. It's just like out there online. And like my hot pants will show up if somebody uses the term Dark Ages incorrect. And like that was literally a thing. Yep. So it's kind of like zeitgeisty, you know, like if I was young enough to understand TikTok, which I'm not, and I'm not going to get involved in that. Like just emphatically, that's not for me.
You got to know yourself.
You gotta play to your strengths. And so the thing is, so you have a blog, have a podcast, do something like that. And I think it's a really good idea to do that. But you also have to have a plan for how you're going to get that in front of people. For me, it wasn't necessarily really a plan. Like, you know, I was just kind of, you know, I was just yelling at Nazis. I don't know. And it just kind of worked. And then, so from there, I kind of got invited on other people's podcasts. So people would like have me kind of along as a guest to talk about things. Then I did the comic book And then, it just kind of like went from there. So
what you're saying is you were a guest on the Medieval podcast.
Yeah.
And then your career
and then my career just took off. It's incredible stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it happened.
Absolutely.
So now you've moved into, well, you haven't left anything behind, girl. You're still doing all of the things.
I'm so tired. It's true.
But now you've moved, especially into doing video. How do you find that different from the, because you've done books, you've done academia, like what are the major differences in like the way that you can reach people, the way that you are trying to reach people? What's different about video? This is a tough question, so I'm going to give you a second to process.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that one of the things that's great about doing video things is that you really do pull people in. Wow, people love to see something. Right? Like, everybody likes to use their imagination too. And that's why podcasts are, a very good, source of things. But there is a real difference between being able to go to a castle and say, hey, everybody, look at the castle, instead of just being like, I need you to imagine a castle.
Yeah.
And if you're dealing with non-expert audiences, like if you want to talk about a cathedral, you can't be like, and now the really interesting thing about the cholera story, in a podcast, because a regular person isn't going to know what that is. But in a video, you can point, right? And you can be like, that's what that is, and so there are these shortcuts that really help you out there. The other thing that I suppose is true about doing things with video is you got to get a thick skin because you're going to have to see yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, it's awful. It's all like, people get put off from hearing their own voice, when you do podcasting, and I hated it at first, and now I'm just like, I'm at work, I can't, but I'm still really uncomfortable seeing myself.
Yeah.
I don't like it and I don't enjoy it, but you still have to like watch things back, and that's unfortunate. The other thing with video though is also you have to plot things very carefully, right? Because when you've got a crew of people and there's a lot of things going on, you're burning money. Essentially, it's like that's a lot of salaries that are happening. So you have to know exactly what it is you're going to do and move very quickly. So one of the things that video rewards more particularly is you have to learn to be succinct.
Yes. Yeah.
And I mean, this is true of this game generally. If even on podcasts, you can't really waffle that hard. And it's one of the downsides of kind of when you're coming from an academic background, like getting into public work, is you're never going to be able to be perfect, right? You're never going to be able to write a book or a dissertation for a regular audience that gets down to the nitty gritty of every single thing you want to say. You have to throw that out the window and have sound bites. And it's not perfect, but perfect is the enemy of public interest, I suppose. And so, the thing that you're kind of trying to do when you're making a TV show or when you're making a podcast is get people in, and then they can go read the book.
Yes.
If they want to, and if they want the extra information there. So like consider yourself to be bringing an audience along so that they can go and get further information. So you need to, when you're doing TV or when you're doing podcasts, be able to just get the soundbite, just get it down to as quickly as possible. And so, it's, and obviously video, it's like one of these things where I suppose now, again, with TikTok, that's a form of video that, again, that I'm simply not involved in or whatever. But, you can start with YouTube on that. And that's something that you can kind of do yourself. You can, if you've got a patient friend, with a good enough camera,
generous friend.
Yeah, you can start off with that on YouTube and kind of like see where it takes you. But the thing with that is know what it is you're going to do, plan your shots out, have the thing that you're going to say ready. And you will get more video work if you're very good at doing that quickly.
Yes, exactly. I think that's the same for anything though. Like when I write a book, my little mantra is more think, less ink, because you got to plan it out first or you're just going to wander in circles. I think it's the same. I mean, we're probably wandering in circles right now, but when you're doing video, you got to plan that out first.
Well, do you know how it's like whenever you've got undergrad students and you just keep being like, I'm just begging you to make an outline. Just like, please make an outline. Your essay will be better. I swear to God, just make the outline. Why don't you want to make an outline? It's the same thing.
Yeah. I was like that too. I was like, it's not part of my process. And then when I started doing outlines, it was life-changing.
Yeah, completely. Oh yeah. I was also 19 once.
Yeah.
I'm still 19 actually. But yeah, and I've absolutely fought it.
Yeah.
I was like, how could I ever write an outline? And the minute I did, I was like, I'm the stupidest person in the world, and outlines are great.
It's ruining my creativity. Okay, so the books that you've done the graphic history, which is all sorts of things. You've done Once Future Sex, which is about women, also about your sex history that you're doing. When you're doing your videos, you're really coming back to the people on the street, the people who are forgotten a lot of ways. What is it you're trying to achieve by shining that light on the people, the regular people? And why did you choose to do that?
Again, I like them. No, I think that that is especially if people are not given medieval history very often. More particularly, they're not given medieval history about ordinary individuals. Like, again, it's 1066.
Yeah.
It's 1215. It's just kings kinging about most kingly, like, right. It's one of the jokes that I kind of make whenever I'm talking about medieval women. I'll be like, yeah, you'd be forgiven for thinking that there were like 3 women in the Middle Ages. It's like, oh yeah, there's Eleanor of Aquitaine, Hildegard of Bingen, and Marjorie Kemp. That's all 3, and those are the ones that people know, right? And I think that it's really kind of important to make the point that ordinary people are interesting. And
what?
Here's the thing, like whenever like there's some charlatan who's like, oh yeah, in a past life I was Cleopatra. It's like everyone was always Cleopatra, right? Like everyone was always the king of France. No, you weren't. You were a peasant, right? If that's true, like if you were a peasant, 85% of us were peasants. You were a peasant. You were farming. You were a peasant, and that's cool.
It's cool.
Actually,
it's fine, yeah.
Like it's really cool to be a peasant, and also it's one of the things that because I remember also learning this, like being told by Teresa Gross Diaz this on like one of my first essays, where I thought peasant just kind of meant like poor person when I was 18, and she was like, no, like that means farmer, and I was like, oh, and because it's used in this really derogatory sense, in a really kind of pejorative sense. And I want people to understand that, the word peasant doesn't necessarily mean anything other than farming. Farming's cool, and farming is actually the thing that keeps people alive. Yeah. Right. And that's interesting in and of itself. And that's the stuff you don't hear about. I'm sorry, the 3-field system, cool as hell. Heavy plows, I love heavy plows. Horse collars, woo! And shout out to my ancestors who were just, in a field somewhere getting the sorghum crop in, right? Like, this stuff is interesting and it's important. And if we say that it isn't, I think to a certain extent that we're saying that we're not interesting and important.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're right. It's true that most of us are just people going about our days, and we wouldn't have been remembered. And I think we should be remembered. We were just nerding out about some of the experimental archaeologists that we know and love. So I'm going to ask you, what has been your favorite thing that you've done on video? And it's going to be Caroline.
It's going to be Caroline. I'm obsessed with Caroline. She's this experiential archaeologist who I met in February, and she's just the coolest person in the entire world. And the thing that I'm happiest that I did is she taught me how to make butter with my hands.
And you did.
I did. Okay. And no, but like, this is my new party trick, right? So you just go to the store and you get cream, like heavy cream preferably, put it in a little bowl, kind of let your hands warm, and start going like this. And it takes like 1 minute. And you get butter, and it does my head in. I couldn't believe it. I'm just still like so excited about it every time. It separates, like you get the curds and whey out, and like this is now anytime like someone invites me over for dinner, this is now my set party piece. I bring some cream in and go check this out.
While
I'm talking, and I'm like, and then no one can believe it, and then everybody wants to do it. I'm telling you, if I go on Come Dine With Me now, that's going to be like, when they do like those kind of like cringe. Like, that's you got to have an activity. Mine's going to be like making butter.
That's a good party trick.
They're never going to let me on Come Dine With Me, but it's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine.
You're going to have to send Caroline a message and tell her this is that Pario Gallico is her Instagram. And
she's amazing.
She's really amazing. And that was on your program on medieval women, right?
Mm-hmm. And medieval women in work, more specifically, was kind of the thing. So with that, we were just kind of trying to make the point that did you know women worked? Which is, it's so like, it sounds so like, I think especially like when you're in a room full of professionals, like that's the most obvious thing in the world. Right, is that women are important, and women worked, and indeed women are expected to work. But there's such a kind of post-Enlightenment malaise of this tendency to think about women as strictly domestic,
Yeah.
And not having jobs. And, you know, and of course I've got all kinds of classist things to say about that. I'm like, yeah, bourgeois women, sure, like not working class women, but okay. But people love to hear about it. And it's something that people don't talk about because, again, like even in medieval society, it's sort of like, well, you wouldn't talk about it because that's just assumed. Of course your wife's working. Mm-hmm. Like, of course she's like mending the plow. Yeah. Of course she's churning butter. Like, of course she brews beer. You know, of course, like she does the books.
Yeah.
You know, these are just kind of matter of fact things that don't bear talking about. Mm-hmm. To a certain extent.
Plus, you'd have to list so many of them. You'd run out of parchment.
Mm-hmm. It's just always like, you know, Tom Smith and wife, you know? So there you go, right? So, and I think that it's just kind of important to make that point. And also I think it's cool just kind of thinking about forms of work from the past, because I think it's nice to kind of think about actually how far we have come in terms of things. Like, you know, I'm sitting here freaking out about, did you know you can make butter with your hands? Like every medieval woman is just like... shaking her head at me, you know, somewhere.
Great job, Eleanor.
Like, oh, look, she thinks she's people, you know. It's like, but it is kind of interesting how alienated we are from a lot of forms of labor that are so incredibly quotidian.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, I just at Shock Valley gave a talk for school kids about how to survive the zombie apocalypse, because if we lose our electricity, we're going to need to know how to churn butter. And now we all know how to do it. Yeah.
Of course, we're going to need a cow. Like that's the first thing. It's like, you're going to need the cow. So, yeah. You're going to need to milk it. You know, like it's just, she's going to go dry after a little bit. There's going to be, there's a whole thing, you know, but that's fine.
So the first thing you're going to do when the zombies come is find yourself a cow.
Oh yeah. Like, you know, girl, I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I'm really good at making fires and things. I'm ready for the zombie apocalypse. Don't worry about that.
I believe it.
Yeah,
I believe.
That's fine.
Okay. I want to ask you one more question. And that is, I think that maybe a book project question is maybe too big, but say you're doing another series. What is your dream series that you could do for TV, for History Hit, for example? What would it be? Like if you had unlimited budget, a cast of thousands, what is it? What is the story you'd like to tell?
Oh, so a cast of thousands. So are we doing like...
Just bring it.
Historical fiction. Oh gosh.
Anything. What would you want to put on TV? Would it be apocalyptic priests?
Kind of. Like, I'm gonna make you all sit down and like. Actually, I think it would be cool to kind of do a thing about the court of Charles IV, because I think that it's really interesting to kind of look at a family. Like, I mean, this is like a Succession kind of story, right? Because you've got the one father figure, Charles IV, who's like incredibly adept and like a really good statesman, and his like several fail sons who are just absolutely diabolically stupid and can't like hold anything together. And you know, you've got like the run up to Hussites coming in. You're building like Prague as this grand imperial city. You know, there's money changing hands. He somehow marries his daughter off to England, and everyone is like, you can't send a Czech girl to England, she'll die. It's what is London?
What is she gonna eat?
They literally sent like someone along to like check that London was okay. They were like, they're like, these people they hardly speak French. It's pathetic, you know. And there would be all these like very comical things with that. Plus, you know, you could be on location the whole time in Prague, and that'd be great.
There you go. That sounds like a show to me. I think we're gonna have to get in touch. Where's Dan Snow? Give me his email.
Dan, increase my budget.
Well, because we are live in front of a studio audience, can we get a round of applause for Eleanor Janega? Thank you for coming on the Medieval Podcast.
All 700 people.
All 700 people. And now I will talk us out of the podcast as I do every week. So Eleanor's books are The Middle Ages, A Graphic History, and The Once and Future Sex, and both are available everywhere you buy fine books. So I want to thank all of the organizers and the crew at the University of Leeds and the International Medieval Congress who made this not only possible, but stress-free, because that is very important. Thanks also to everyone listening, both here and at home, especially the people who are patrons on Patreon, because without that, it would not be possible for me to keep doing this podcast. So a special shout out to people who are on Patreon every week. Make sure, if you want to get on the action and all of the things that we offer on Patreon, please visit patreon.com/medievalists. And for everyone, from Eleanor Janega to Eleanor of Aquitaine. Follow medievalist.net on Facebook or Twitter at medievalists. You can find me, Danièle Cybulski, on social media at 5MIN Medievalist or 5 Minute Medievalist. And you can find my books at all your favorite bookstores, where you can even pre-order my new book, Chivalry and Courtesy, Medieval Manners for a Modern World, which comes out in September. Our music is Beyond the Warriors by Guy Frog. Thanks for listening, and have yourself an awesome day.